I used to work as a night librarian from my mid-20s to my early 30s. It was an interesting job, although not without its challenges. When I first applied, I was expecting to work mid-shifts, but a few months later, they decided to introduce a new overnight position. The library itself was housed in a grand old stone building in the heart of the town, which gave it a certain charm, but also an eerie atmosphere during the quiet nighttime hours. Initially, I was hesitant to take on the overnight shifts. The idea of being alone in such a large old building was a bit unsettling. However, the offer of a higher pay rate for overnight hours was too tempting to pass up. So I found myself transitioning to the nocturnal schedule, spending my nights organizing shelves and tidying up the library's vast collection of books. At first, everything seemed to be going smoothly. The work was quiet and solitary, allowing me to focus on the tasks at hand without distractions. But as the months passed, I began to notice a shift in the atmosphere of the library. There was a growing sense of unease that seemed to permeate the air, especially during the late hours of the night. I would often find myself looking over my shoulder, feeling as though I was being watched from the shadows. The creaking of the old floorboards and the occasional flutter of pages turning on their own added to the eerie ambiance. Despite my best efforts to shake off the feeling of unease, it persisted, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Then, one fateful night, things took a turn for the worse. I was going about my usual routine, lost in thought as I organized a shelf of books, when I heard a faint sound echoing through the empty library. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, a distinct thud coming from somewhere deep within the building. My heart began to race as I cautiously made my way towards the source of the noise. Every step felt heavy, each creak of the floorboards echoing in the silence. As I rounded a corner, I caught sight of a shadowy figure lurking in the dimly lit hallway. Panic surged through me as I realized I was not alone. I wanted to scream, to run, but fear rooted me to the spot. I watched in horror as the figure moved closer, its presence sending shivers down my spine. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my phone, dialing the emergency number as I struggled to maintain my composure. The sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing ominously in the empty corridors. When the police arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the building, but found no trace of the intruder. I was left shaken and bewildered, grappling with the unsettling realization that I had come face to face with something inexplicable and terrifying. In the days that followed, I found myself haunted by the encounter, unable to shake the feeling that something sinister lurked within the shadows of the library. Despite the assurances of my colleagues that it was simply a figment of my imagination, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something dark and malevolent that night. And so I continued my nightly duties, but with a newfound sense of caution and apprehension. The library, once a sanctuary of knowledge and learning, had become a place of fear and uncertainty, its quiet halls now filled with the echoes of my own trepidation. I used to be a bus driver for the local suburban kindergarten and elementary schools. After nearly 15 years, I retired from that job and started driving for the buses in the city where I lived. I loved my job driving kids around, but as I got older, it became more difficult for me to put on a smiling face every day and interact with energetic and chaotic children. Driving in the city, the bus lot was only a 10-minute walk from my apartment, and the passengers would mostly just get in and out. While the actual driving part of the job was more stressful, I still felt a sense of relief compared to before. Anyway, the city bus company I worked for had buses running 24/7, though at night they only had a few buses out, and they would just run longer routes. Few drivers actually wanted these shifts, so all of us day drivers were forced to do 2 night shifts every other week. It wasn't horrible, aside from it messing up my sleep schedule. There were fewer passengers and the roads were more empty, so the job was much more relaxing than it was during the day. It was somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m. this night, and nobody was out. I drove my normal route several times over the course of an hour, and not a single person needed a ride. I maybe only saw 4 or 5 people total even walking outside. I pulled up to the last stop of the route and parked, not to pick anyone up, but just to take a quick break while it wasn't busy. I leaned my head on the back of the seat and closed my eyes to rest them. I was being sure not to fall asleep, but soon enough came at the door. My eyes shot open as I was startled by the sudden noise. An older man was standing at the door, looking at me. I made a nervous and awkward smile, then opened the door. He stepped in and scanned his bus pass, then went to the very back of the bus and sat down. "Nobody else is out, so I can drop you off wherever you need," I yelled, turning my head slightly towards the back. There was a really awkward few seconds before I turned back forward and started on the road again. I thought he might have had earbuds in or something, so I was just going to do it the hard way and stop at every bus stop along the route like I was supposed to. Over the course of the drive, I constantly checked the mirror, seeing the man just sitting in the back, staring ahead. It was odd behavior, but who knows what these people have on their minds at 3 a.m. I pulled up to every stop on the route and was approaching the last 2, wondering when this man was going to get off. After these, it just loops back around to where I picked him up. When I stopped at the next spot, I put the bus in park and looked at the man in the mirror. After a second, he got up. He began walking down the aisle, but the way he was staring at the floor was really unusual. As he got closer, I turned my body around and could see his face. It was full of anger and rage. I tried to act normal, turning my face to the road again, but the guy stopped right next to me. I looked over, and he was staring down at me. "Is everything okay?" The man continued staring, but then he looked away and walked back down the aisle and sat down. This was the point where I knew something was very wrong, and I started to worry. After a moment, I put the bus back in drive and headed to the next and final stop. When we arrived, I put it in park and waited. There was a sort of tension in this moment that was hard to describe. I looked ahead at the empty roads and sidewalks. Then the man got up and walked quickly down the aisle. He approached me, but this time he shoved me against the side window and held a gun against my head. Looking him in the eyes, he had that same look as before, crazed anger and rage. I didn't know why or what he wanted from me, but I was sure he was going to pull that trigger. The man didn't say anything. He just tensed up and pushed the gun against my head even harder, still staring me in the eyes. Then he opened his mouth wide and screamed right in my face, just a painfully loud, angry scream. Then he let go, backed up, and walked out. I closed the door quickly and drove away. I called the police as soon as possible, knowing that his bus pass would have his identity in the system. An officer was sent to where I dropped the man off, while one came to where I was to get more information. A couple of days later, they showed me a picture of the man who was on the bus pass that the stranger had used, but it was a completely different person. I don't know what kind of sick mind that man had or what he wanted from me, but that was the most unusual, disturbing, and creepy encounter I've ever had and will probably ever have. It was a rainy night, the kind that made the world outside seem like a distant memory. I found myself in the back room of our building, surrounded by towering stacks of boxes as I went about my routine tasks in the quiet solitude of the hardware store. With my coworker on vacation, it was just me for the night, but I didn't mind. There's a strange comfort in the stillness of the night, a sense of autonomy that comes with being left alone to tend to the store. As I meticulously organized the deliveries that had arrived earlier in the day, the rhythmic patter of rain against the roof provided a soothing backdrop to my work. I moved with a deliberate slowness, taking my time to ensure everything was in its rightful place. In moments like these, time seems to stretch on endlessly, and there's no rush to complete the tasks at hand. Lost in my thoughts and the monotonous hum of the fluorescent lights above, I was startled by a faint noise coming from the front of the building. At first, I dismissed it as nothing more than the building settling, but as the sound persisted, curiosity got the better of me. I made my way to the front of the store, peering out into the darkness beyond the rain-streaked windows. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the storm raging outside. Then, movement caught my eye, a fleeting shadow dancing on the edge of my vision. My heart quickened as I strained to make out the figure lurking just beyond the reach of the storefront lights. With a sense of unease creeping over me, I retreated back into the safety of the store, the weight of the empty aisles pressing in around me. As I resumed my tasks, the feeling of being watched lingered, casting a shadow over the otherwise mundane evening. Each creak of the floorboards and rustle of packaging seemed amplified, as if the darkness itself were alive with unseen threats. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to an overactive imagination, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Hours passed in a blur, the minutes dragging on like an eternity as I anxiously awaited the dawn. But just as I began to let my guard down, the silence was shattered by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. My heart leaped into my throat as I raced to the front of the store, adrenaline coursing through my veins. What I saw next would haunt me for years to come. Through the shattered remains of the storefront window stood a figure, their features obscured by the darkness outside. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that this was no ordinary break-in. This was something far more sinister, something beyond my comprehension. In a panic, I fumbled for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed the emergency number. With each passing second, the sense of dread only grew stronger, a palpable presence that seemed to suffuse the very air around me. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The figure vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but shattered glass and unanswered questions. As the police arrived and began their investigation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that the fabric of reality itself had been irrevocably altered by the events of that fateful night. And though I tried to bury the memories deep within my subconscious, they would continue to resurface in my dreams, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edges of our perception.